Hi, it shows today only as the tutorial day, right? On the website.
Yes, yes.
Okay, awesome. Okay, so hi, welcome to the last tutorial for forests and their management. And I'm Geetika Agarwal. I'm the PhD scholar of Center for Ecological Sciences, IIC. So the last week of forests and their management was all about revision, and basically just went through the entire course in like a short manner. So that is what today will also be mostly. And if you have any doubts, you can actually ask me right now, or you can ask me in the middle of any of the slides. And yeah, and in the end, we'll have a short quiz. So, do you have any doubts, or should I start
Yeah, you can start.
the tutorial? Okay, cool. So, we start by discussing what is a forest. And as you might already know, according to the definition in the dictionary, forest is basically a large area which is covered mostly with trees and undergrowth. So it's important to keep in mind that it says chiefly here, which means that it's not entirely covered with trees, but it's more or less covered with trees, and then there is some undergrowth and other shrubs and grasses and things like that. Then when you look at the origin of the word forest or the etymology of the word, you see that it originates in Latin from forest which means basically outside, and silva means wood. So forestus silva means wood which is outside. So when you talk about forest, it's basically a wooded area which is outside of the area occupied by people, and it was mostly used for hunting. Okay, and if you come to other definitions, there were legal definitions, there were Supreme Court definitions. All of these were discussed during the course. And we talk about ecological definition, which basically means that forest is a plant community which predominantly includes trees and other woody plants, usually in a closed canopy. So an important thing to note here would be that ecologically in the forest, it does not consider the um, animals. Like it basically describes forests as a plant community which consists of trees and other plants, and they are in a closed canopy, but it does not mention animals at all in the ecological definition. And legally, any area of land which is proclaimed to be forest under the forest law, which is the Indian Forest Act of 1927. So legally it is just defined as any area of land which has been proclaimed or declared to be a forest under the forest law. So these are some of the definitions of a forest. Moving on to what is the value of forests. So why are these forests important, and what is the value that we can assign to the forests around us? So basically, there is a total economical value which we get from the forest, which can be separated into two sorts: use value and non use value. And then further use value can be described in the form of direct, indirect, or option value. And non use value can be shown as existence, altruistic, or bequest value. So, can I ask you guys, do you remember how are use value and non use value different from each other? What is use value and what is non use value? You can either type it out in the chat box or you can unmute yourself and say the answer. How is use value different from non use value?
Use value is arising out of use of the source. Non-use value arises even though the resources is not being used.
Very good, exactly. So, basically, use value talks about when you're actually using the resource, and non use value is just because the resource exists there, but you're not really using it. So when you talk about use and non-use values, there are three different forms as we discussed. There is direct value, which is basically when you're using the forest directly, either in a consumptive or a non-consumptive manner. So can you guys now tell me what is consumptive and non-consumptive manner of using a forest, or anything for that matter? What is a consumptive way of using a resource versus a non-consumptive way?
When using all the resources available in the forest, that is the consumptive way. If we are not using the forest resources, but only like only the land, only like the things which uh, are not that important, but we are still using it, then that would be the non-consumptive manner.
Can you give me an example?
Example of consumptive or non-consumptive.
Both of them.
Consumptives are the like fruits, or like the vegetables, or like wood, we got the
Hmm.
and soil, etc. And the non-consumptive are the like dark shades, the free free land, which we can just like sit and enjoy.
Basically, yeah. Good. So, direct value is technically, yeah, when you're using the forest. Consumptive, as Gaurav said, basically when you're using the resource, but something that you missed to mention was when the resource reduces after you have consumed it. So basically, as you mentioned, wood or non-timber forest produce things like that, like taking out fruits or medicinal plants. If one person has gone and taken out that resource, now it is reduced. Another person, like the next person will not get the same amount of resource out of that forest because somebody has already consumed it. Non-consumptive value is basically, even though you use the resource, the amount of resource does not go down. So if you think about tourism, if somebody is going on a jungle safari, if they have seen 10 tigers, that does not reduce the number of tigers that exist in the forest for the next person who will go and see these on the jungle safari. So that's the non-consumptive use. Basically, you're not affecting the amount of resource that is there. There's still the same amount of resource, and multiple people can use it over and over again. So that's a non-consumptive manner of using a resource, right? And then there is an indirect use. So you're not directly getting anything out of the forest, but indirectly we're benefiting from the services that the forest is providing us. For example, there are these different ecological services, watershed benefits, ecosystem services, and evolutionary processes that are happening in the forest from which we benefit. So, for example, watershed benefits in the sense that if there is an area which has less amount of water, even then a forest is beneficial, or even if it is an area which gets a lot of water, still a forest is beneficial. And let me explain how. If there is a less amount of water in that area, if there's a forest, the trees and the roots of the trees and the soil system there will be able to retain much more water. And if an area receives less amount of rainfall, if there's a forest there, it will still retain much more amount of water compared to an area which is barren and receives an equal amount of rainfall. So that is how it provides you watershed benefits, because it retains a lot more water in the ground. Or if it's an area which is prone to flooding, again, if the area is barren, there is a lot more flow of the water and it will get flooded much more easily compared to if it's a forest. The trees will slow down the flow of water, and they'll also prevent a river from overflowing, and they'll help the river maintain its course. And that's how it provides you benefits. It provides you ecosystem services in both scenarios. Then other ecosystem services in the sense of pollination, there are a lot of um, organisms that exist in the forest, and they pollinate all the fruits and other plants there, which provide you non-timber produce. And different evolutionary processes happening in the forest which also help us, in the sense that we observe these different species that exist in the forest, or we get benefits from these different evolutionary processes, in the sense that if plants evolved to like provide you certain medicines, certain different fruits, this is again helpful to the humans around there, or if you want to derive benefits out of that. So that's an indirect benefit. Then there is option value, in the sense that we just want to have an option, that okay, we have an option that the forest exists, we can gain a benefit out of it either in the future. We can get like a direct benefit or an indirect benefit. We just want to have an option. So for example, I have a forest land near me, but or I own a forest land, but I don't want to fell the trees right now, I don't want to clear the land right now, but I would like to retain the option that I can actually extract timber out of this forest in the future, or it will help me later in with its ecosystem services. For example, the trees are small right now, but later when they grow bigger, they will always improve the air quality, water quality near me. So that's like retaining an option for the future of keeping a forest land. Then there are non-use values where we are not using the forest at all, but we have a value out of its existence, in the sense that we are happy that the forests exist because we know that maybe somebody else within our generation or within our lifespan could be using the forest. So that's an existence value. Then there is altruistic value. Okay, so existence value is actually we're just happy that something exists. For example, if there are polar bears, there are snow leopards, we're just happy that these organisms exist, even though we do not get any benefit out of it. So the knowledge of existence brings us joy. So that's a non-use value. Altruistic value is basically where we are happy that okay, the forest exists and somebody else in our generation could be using that resource. So we would like to maintain that forest. And then there is bequest value where we would like to, yeah,
Actually, I had a doubt. You said before that animals would not be counted as part of the forest, right?
yeah.
But here we are including the examples of animals in the existence value, like you said that uh, the animals are there. We are just happy to see them. But animals are not part of the forest. Then how can we use it as an example?
Yeah, they're not a part of the forest in the sense of the dictionary definition, but in reality, they are a part of the forest. So if somebody goes out, if somebody counts ecotourism, this not like it's not just that people are going out to see the woods, right? We're also going out to see the animals that exist in the wood. Like mostly, if you think about ecotourism, most people go out to look at the birds or to look at the big mammals and things like that. So you can't actually separate them out from the forest. It's just that when in the dictionary it's not defined like that, they don't include the, like they don't mention the animals in the dictionary definition. So that's why I was just asking you to note, like keep a note that it's not described in the dictionary like that, while it actually should have been, because animals also form a major portion of the forest area, but they are just using plants to describe forests. But here also you can actually, if you don't want to, like you can just keep this, if you want to describe use value and not include animals in that, you can just say that okay, fine, in the non-consumptive manner, in ecotourism people are just going to see forests and waterfalls and they're paying money for doing all of that. So that does not include animals in that existence value. I'm just happy knowing that forests exist in the Himalayas, so that also gives you a value out of
Okay.
that.
Yeah. So
So
in the exam, if there is question like in the existence value, we can include the animals in this, right?
yes,
In the
yes.
exam or
If
not?
you get an exam in the exam, if you get a question saying existence value about like some species existing in some forests, like in the Amazon forests, um, and things like that, you can include animals in your answer. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. So bequest value is basically just leaving behind the resources for future generations. Like um, there was a huge uproar sometimes, and there's still going on, that we should save forests and we should save animals, biodiversity in general, for the future generations as well, because otherwise we are destroying the planet, or we are destroying the joy that other generations can get out of it. So bequest value is the value that you are happy that we'll be leaving behind these resources for the future generation. So this is all about the use and the non-use values of that you can get out of a forest, right? Then next thing is, how do you measure the value of the forest? So we talked about all these use non-use values. How do you evaluate? How do you measure how much value you can get out of a forest? So there are different approaches that you can take for evaluating the value of a forest. One of them is market price, or the revealed willingness to pay. Basically, market price talks about okay, how much timber I can extract out of the forest, what is the amount of timber I can extract, how much money will I get paid for that, how much non-timber forest produce, how much money will I get paid for that. So it's basically the actual amount of money that you will get paid for taking those resources out of the forest. So that's the market price. How much will that land, like somebody pay for that land which is occupied by the forest? How much timber can you extract out of that land? How much non-timber forest produce you can extract? So that's the market price. Then there is Within market price, okay, yeah. So there are three different types. Sorry, I confused it. So within the market price, the revealed willingness to pay, how much people are ready to pay. Market pricing is what I already described. Then there is hedonic pricing, which basically compares the price based on the real estate. So if there are two areas, for example, you imagine there are two areas. One of them is has a lush green forest, and the other one is located close to an industrial area, or the other one is close to a city. So now you have apartments or hotels in these two areas, right? Hedonic pricing tells that people will charge you. So, what is the difference in the price that you are ready to pay to be able to see that scenery, to be able to be close to the forest? So, for example, again, if you are talking about hotels, you would know that if there's a hotel which provides you a mountain view, which provides you a forest view, provides you ocean view, things like that, those rooms they charge more compared to a room which just overlooks the city, right? So that would be hedonic pricing. Similarly, if there's somebody selling out flats, they will charge more for a flat which is overlooking a forested area, or again a mountain area, compared to the flats that are overlooking the normal city. So that difference in the cost for these two real estate things is the hedonic pricing, right? And travel cost basically talks about how much are people willing to travel to enjoy the forest. So if there are forests in the northeast, say I want to go and look at the Eagle Nest Wildlife Sanctuary, or I want to look at the national forest somewhere. So, how much am I willing to pay? Staying in Bangalore, I want to take a flight and then I'm going to take a local guide. So much money I'm going to spend just to go and enjoy the forest. So, that is the travel cost, how much people are willing to pay. That all this comes under the market price, or the revealed willingness to pay, how much people are actually paying for all of this benefits from the forest. Next, there is circumstantial evidence, the assigned willingness to pay. So this talks about replacement cost and damage cost. Basically, replacement cost would be that, okay, fine, I have cut down the forests, or like the government has cut down the forest from one area. How much do they have to replace to get the same amount of benefit? So basically, for example, imagine that there is a forest, and people have been releasing their, for example, sewage into that area, right? But eventually the forest sort of cleansifies the water before it reaches the river, right? So for example, all of these trees, they act on the waste. There are a lot of these fungi, there is mushrooms, there is scavengers which act on the waste, and then they provide you cleaner water compared to what you have thrown into the forested area. Or they're providing you things like they're maintaining the air quality, right? So for example, you have a higher air quality in areas which are close to forest compared to areas which are far away from forest. So what is the replacement cost of maintaining that similar air quality if you cut down the forest from the area? So that would be the replacement cost. Next is the damage cost. Basically, for example, if you have forests, say you have forest, mangrove forest close to, like they are next to a river, or you have forests which are close, which form a barrier between a city and the ocean. So, if you cut down these forests, you can face damages like floods, like tsunamis. So, how much will you have to pay to make a similar boundary? For example, you build a huge wall next to the city to prevent the seawater from like damaging the city, right? To prevent the high tides or to prevent tsunamis from damaging the cities. So, how much are you willing to pay to handle these damages in the absence of the forest? So these are the two things which come under circumstantial evidence, or the assigned willingness to pay. Replacement cost is basically how much I'm willing to replace the forest with. So for example, I will have to put up these sewage treatment plants, or I will have to put up, say, dams to control flooding and things like that. So what is the replacement cost versus damage cost? How much am I willing to pay to repair the damage that has been caused after losing a forest from that area? Okay. So this comes under circumstantial evidence. Then there is
So
survey based.
replacement, replacement and damage costs are basically uh, main. What is the main difference between them?
So replacement cost is basically if the forest is providing some some ecosystem services, how much are we willing to replace? how much price are we willing to uh, pay to replace the forest. So agar मैं if I'm talking about say I have the same example of forest acting as a barrier for tsunamis, right? Replacement cost would be कि मैं forest हटा के I'm putting up a huge wall, so that is a replacement cost, right? Damage cost would be I removed the forest, now the tsunami has occurred and the damage is caused. How much am I willing to pay to like handle this damage now, to rebuild the city, right?
So I can assume that replacement cost will always be lower than the damage cost, right? Or
Not really. It depends on the
no,
scenario that
like
you're talking about.
a scenario like if there is like a higher EQR level, but in replacement cost, uh, huge like replacement cost and the damage cost would be same because the machines of to lower the AQI have the same price in both the situations. So
No, so in the
either can
damage
be
cost,
equal or lower.
uh, yeah, so in the damage cost, it will also include however many people have gotten sick because of the uh, bad air. So damage cost will also include all the medical charges of all the people who have gotten sick because of the pollution that has risen in that area.
Yeah, so damage cost would be higher mainly.
Yeah. Okay, yeah, that's what you were saying. Basically, yeah, damage cost will mostly should be higher than the replacement cost because it's a after effect. Right. And survey, the last one, the how to measure the value based on survey. It's basically the expressed willingness to pay. So you carry out a survey and you ask people, okay, how much? So for example, um for contingent value, in the sense that you have a forest close to an area, and you carry out a survey and you ask people how much are they willing to pay to maintain that forest. So if the government is collecting taxes, how much are people willing to pay to keep that forest intact? For example, there's a builder, he says that okay, I want to cut down the forest and build flats there, I want to build mall there, I want to build an industrial area there. How much are people willing to pay to save the forest and prevent this from happening? So that is the expressed willingness to pay. Okay. Then we talk about classification of forests. Forests can be classified based on different abiotic and biotic factors. So can you guys tell me some factors which are used for classifying different forests?
Ma'am, can you repeat the last one if possible?
The previous one, the survey.
Last part of that survey. Yeah.
So basically, survey is like a simple example is if there's a forest next to a city, and there are people living there, and now the government wants to replace it, or so it's owned by the government wants to replace it with a mall to get more money out of that, or they want to build some industry there. How much are people willing to pay in the form of taxes for them to maintain the forest? For example, the government says that okay, we can't maintain the forest anymore, we don't have enough money to do that. How much are people willing to pay? That okay, fine, we'll give you so much amount of taxes per year, but please don't destroy the forest. So that's basically an expressed willingness to pay.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah.
This is basically the contingent value. Uh,
Yeah.
we can say. Okay.
Okay. And the next I was asking you, can you guys list out some abiotic or biotic factors to classify forests, which can be used to classify forests? Anyone? Okay, so some factors which can be used to classify forests are basically rainfall, temperature, soil fertility, soil type, species colonization, and interaction between different species. So basically, how much amount of rainfall is there in that area? What is the temperature? How fertile is the soil? What is the type of soil there? Which species are present in that area? So, for example, you can say that it's a pine forest, it's a teak forest, sal forest, like that. So that is also a forest type. And what is the interaction between different species? So basically, if there are multiple species present in that forest, then that can again be used to classify that forest. That this species along with this species is present in this forest. Or for example, it could be like, you could be talking about the fungi in the area, could be talking about mushrooms, mycorrhizae, things like that. Then globally, there are these eight, nine, one, two, three, four, five, six, seven, eight, nine. There are these nine classifications which have been given based on the different biomes and based on the and then it comes under different climate zones and vegetations. So globally, the forests have been divided as tropical rainforest, tropical seasonal forests or savannas, then subtropical deserts, woodland, shrubland, temperate rainforests, seasonal forests, temperate grasslands, boreal forests, and tundra. We have discussed all of these in great detail during the previous tutorials. You can go through this table and look at what comes under different classifications. It's basically just definitions of what comes under which classification. Then, talking about the taxonomy of Indian forests, so Champion and Sate gave a classification in 1968, according to which they divided forests or the Indian forests as tropical, montane subtropical, montane temperate, subalpine, or alpine scrubs. And within tropical forests, then there are things like wet evergreen forests, semi evergreen forests, moist deciduous forests, swamps, dry deciduous forests, thorny forests, or dry evergreen forests. So you might already be aware that evergreen forests are forests in which the trees do not lose their leaves at any time during the year. They basically retain their leaves throughout the year. Semi evergreen forests would be forests in which some trees retain their leaves while others lose their leaves. But overall, and at any time when you visit the forest, you will find trees with leaves. So you will not you'll not come across the forest entirely devoid of leaves. At any time you go, you'll still find that at least some species, if not all, are retaining their leaves. Then there is moist deciduous forest. Deciduous is where seasonally the trees lose their leaves in order to maintain the water content, right? So during the dry seasons, the trees mostly end up losing their leaves to prevent the amount of transpiration that happens during that season. And moist deciduous are basically which have a little slightly higher amount of water in that or moisture in that area. Dry deciduous are places where there's slightly less amount of water in that area. Then montane subtropical, as you can see, subtropical is basically slightly away from the tropics, but still um, not reached the temperate area. So, like if you look at the Earth, you have equator, then there are tropics, then there are the temperate zones, things like that. So, if it's slightly away from the tropics, but still not close to the temperate area, it comes under the montane subtropical, includes broad-leaved forests, pine forests, dry evergreen forests. Then there are montane temperate forests, which are more close to the temperate zone, subalpine forests, and alpine scrubs. Subalpine, basically, if you go higher in the altitude, you will have some amount of trees, but if you go even more than that, then you eventually reach the alpine scrubs because trees cannot grow in that area. It's not conducive for trees to be maintained because they are high, they need more biomass, they need more productivity for them to maintain themselves. So eventually, if you go higher and higher in the mountains, you will see that it's just scrublands and grasses. So these are different types of forests that are found in India. Then there are different layers of the forest. This you guys would already be aware of. Can you tell me what are the different layers on the forest?
First, the base layer where the soil is, and then the plants, then small trees, then the big trees.
Yeah, but what are they called? There's like a terminology that's used for the different layers of the forests, which you should be aware of. So what is the terminology used for the lowest then like the four layers of the forest?
I think I tried my best.
Anybody else? Okay. So basically, the lowest one is the forest floor, which consists of the most humid layer, and it has a lot of grasses and a lot of humus. Basically, a lot of dead decaying matter. And then there is a lot of scavengers and there are animals moving around on the floor and things like that. Then there is understory layer, which consists of young herbs, shrubs, bushes. So understory is basically either young plants or herbs and bushes. Then there's canopy layer, which is the thickest layer. Basically, most forests have a continuous canopy cover, as it came in the definition. It should more or less have a continuous canopy cover, and this is the thickest layer where most trees reach their height, and then they do not let sunlight pass through. So that's the thickest layer, which has a lot of flora and fauna. Why fauna? Because a lot of birds are found in this layer. There's a lot of langurs, monkeys moving around in this layer, a lot of squirrels, things like that. So this layer also hosts a lot of flora and fauna. Then there's emergent layer, which are some trees which shoot higher up from the canopy. So basically, these are light demanding trees which need a lot more sunlight. So they will go even higher than the canopy layer so that they get maximum amount of sunlight. And here also you will find some birds and insects existing here, but not a lot of animals. Even the trees, the monkeys and langurs can reach the emergent layer, but they usually don't. They're not found a lot of the times here. They're mostly found in the canopy because they can travel through the canopy because it's connected. Emergent layer is just like a few trees popping around here and there, but they're not continuous. So these are the different layers of the forest: forest floor, understory, canopy, and emergent layer. Then we talked about successions, primary succession, secondary succession during the ecological succession classes of the course. Here we talk about how from bare rock, from like nothing, basically eventually on the bare rock over time there are some pioneer species like lichens which occupy these rocks. There's crustose lichens, there's foliose lichens. First come the crustose lichens because they form a very thin layer of the rocks, and they eventually slightly break down the rock. Then comes the foliose lichens, which have slight leaf like structures, and they break down the rock further to make it into and they can extract some nutrients out of it. So why plants can't grow over rocks is because their roots cannot just penetrate rock, and they cannot extract nutrients out of it. So these lichens, they can actually attach on the rock surface and slightly, very slowly break down the rock into smaller elements, and they can make like a fine soil layer on these. Eventually small annual plants can grow on these because grasses and all, they can attach slightly and their roots can penetrate a little bit, and they can cause further breaking down, weathering of the rocks so as to make it convert it into soil. And then eventually, as these plants keep dying and they stay there only, they add organic matter also to the area. So now there is broken down rock and there's organic matter to provide nutrients to these further plants, right? So then there's grasses and perennials. Perennials basically they can survive over multiple years. Then there are intermediate species including grasses, shrubs, and some shade tolerant trees. And then finally, there's a climax community. Climax community is more or less constant. After the climax, the forest does not get altered much. So it stays consistently in this state, if otherwise not altered by either forest fires or humans and like not cut down. Things like that, it can maintain in the climax community is the final stage that the succession reaches. And it consists of shade tolerant trees like oak and hickory. It depends on different forests. So these oak trees will not be found in all forests. Different forests will have different climax communities, but this is just an example. Then there is secondary succession. Secondary succession does not start with bare rock. It starts in an area where there already existed a forest, but then it got destroyed. Probably there was like a forest fire or there was a volcanic eruption, and so it probably got destroyed somehow. Like that forest got destroyed. Either there was flooding or there was fire in that area, and now all the trees are destroyed. There's not much animals also in that area. Eventually, over time, because it will happen sooner than primary succession, because it's not starting on bare rock, it's starting on an area which already has soil existing there. So it starts with these pioneer species of grasses, annual grasses, and perennial grasses, and then eventually the same intermediate and climax communities, right? So this was all about primary and secondary succession, which we have discussed in previous classes. Then we come to the question of what is soil, what includes soil, and how we because it is important for a forest. If there's no soil, there's no trees, right? So what is soil? Soil is basically a mix of rock debris and organic matter which develop on the surface of earth, and it supports plant growth, right? So soil does not only include rock debris. It also has organic matter, dead decaying matter, and this develops on the surface of the earth, supports plant growth. There are four components in the soil. So can you guys tell me what are the four components found in soil? We have discussed this earlier in our classes, and it'll be nice if you remember. So what are the four different components that are present in soil? Anyone would like to take a guess for any of these components? No? Okay, so there are four different components in soil. One is humus. As I said, organic matter is present in the soil. Minerals, water, and air. So minerals come from the rock debris. The rocks contain are composed of minerals, right? They include phosphorus and sulfur and all of these different minerals present within the rock, which are present in a very tight fashion. They're like bound inside there, but eventually, when it gets broken down, forms soil. These get like distributed and can be taken up by plants. And then, as you know, there is water and there is air present in the soil. So there are four components: humus, minerals, water, and air. And there are different layers to the soil. So, soil horizon. Yeah, so there are different layers of soil. Here you can see that we have the topmost layer is the organic layer, which is also called humus, which is the O horizon. Then there is topsoil, which is the A horizon. Then there is subsoil, which is B horizon, parent material, basically from the rocks which are breaking down, C horizon, and eventually bedrock, which is R horizon. And the soil horizon is basically the definition of soil horizon is that layer of the soil which is parallel to the surface, and it's physically and chemically and biologically they are different from the layers above and below them. So they are distinguishable on all of these levels, physically, chemically, and biologically, and they are distinguishable even based on the color and texture. So organic layer mostly includes dead decaying matter, which is humus. Topsoil includes finer soil, which includes some amount of humus, but is mostly sandy, loamy texture. Then there is subsoil, parent material breaking down here in the sea horizon, and eventually there is bedrock. So these are the different soil layers. Moving on to the next lecture, which talked about forest mensuration, taking down different measurements in forests, which is also important for the forest department, or even if somebody is personally owning a forest, it's important to measure the different values of the trees in order to maintain the forests. So there is no maintenance without measurement. Then there is a thing about measuring tree diameter. So how do you measure the tree diameter? There's tree form, which we discussed during this lecture. Like when we discussed that lecture, there was tree form. The trees have a certain shape. They are broad at the base, and eventually they taper and become slightly thinner and thinner as you reach higher in the tree, right? And they eventually start branching out. So you measure tree diameter, and tree diameter usually needs to be measured at a standard point because the tree tapers, right? So what is that standard point where we measure the tree diameter? That's called the height at the diameter at breast height. So the breast height at which the DBH is supposed to be measured is different in different countries. In USA, the breast height is 1.37 meters, which is usually considered standard. In most other countries, it can be somewhere close to 1.3 meters, and Japan and Korea specifically use 1.2 meters as their breast height, and that is the height at which you measure the tree diameter. Right here, you can see that they're using a tape measure to measure the tree diameter. So from the tape, you will get the circumference, and from the circumference, you can measure from 2 pi r. You can measure r, and from r you can get 2r, which is the diameter, right? Then the next is about how do you get here? How do you get to measuring the diameter? It can be measured over bark, which is including the bark, DOB, can be measured under bark, which is excluding the bark. So here you can see if you include this brown bark, that would be diameter over bark. If you do not include this, just include the gray area, that would be under bark. And the thickness here, you can see the thickness of the brown colored part, that will be the thickness of the bark. And as you can imagine, DOB will be DUB plus 2 times the thickness.
Sorry, this gray part, uh, which part is this gray part exactly?
It's basically the part of the tree minus the bark, which will be the cambium zone, right? The internal part, which includes xylem and phloem.
So, but to measure that, first we have to like exclude the outer part, right? The main hard part. We have to cut that, and then we will measure, or
So
is there
basically,
some
if
other
they
way?
want to measure the underbark diameter, you can you can get the overbark diameter, and then from one place you can take out like a strip of the bark and see how thick it is, and then you can subtract that to get the underbark, right?
Okay, okay, yeah. I
You
got
don't really
it.
have to take out the entire bark from it to measure it. Can do that also, but an easier way would just be to take out the bark from some area and measure the thickness and use that, right?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. So next is to measure the height of the tree. Now that you measured how thick the tree is, so this all is usually measured to understand how much timber you can extract from those plants, from those trees in the forest, and to understand how much value you'll get from this timber extraction, right? So next is about measuring the heights of the trees. How do you get to that? So total height is basically the bole height and plus the crown height. So bole is basically the part of the tree below the point where the first branches start to come out. Okay. So if you have a tree here and it starts to branch somewhere here, here you see that there are branches. So this height below which the branching starts is called the bole height, and above that is the crown length, from where you can see that okay, it becomes like a full tree like this. So that's the crown length and this is the bole height. Okay. So so the total height of the tree is basically bole height plus the crown length. And then bole height is the height, as I said, below the lowest branch in the crown. It has commercial value because that straight log or the straight bole of the tree can be sold and used for timber purposes. And then there are two ways to measure it: direct measures, where you can directly put an instrument against the bark and measure it, or you can climb the tree and throw a string to measure height. So directly put an instrument in the sense that say you have this tree here and you want to get the bole height, somebody can climb this area and throw down a string, and then you would get the height of the bole, right? If you throw down a string from here, you will get the height. So that's one way of doing it. Another way of doing it is to basically, yeah, is to basically use an instrument. So you can use like a rod, like a straight rod of which the length you know. So you see example, you have a 5 meter rod, so you can attach one 5 meter rod to another 5 meter rod to another rod, and from that you can estimate the height of the tree, right? So you can measure it directly like this. Either you place an instrument directly against the bark of the tree, or somebody can climb the tree and throw down a string. So that's the way of getting the height directly. Or there are indirect measures in which you can either use it based on similar triangles, or you can base it on trigonometry and get the height, right? One of the examples I'll give you is the shadow method, which we have discussed in length earlier. This uses the similar triangle method. Basically, you look at what shadow the tree makes on the ground based on the sun's angle. All of that, you don't have to worry about the sun's angle, but you see that okay, what this is the tree length and this is the shadow length, right? And then you put here something like a pole of known length, and then you see how much shadow, how much is the length of the shadow of that pole, right? And then you can use the principle of similar triangles. Basically, if it's a similar triangle, then AB on this AB divided by this AB should be equal to DB divided by small db. So basically, the sides are proportionate in both of these areas. So if you look at similar triangles, AB, the same side on this triangle divided by the same side on this triangle should be equal to the ratio of this length to this length, and should be equal to the ratio of this length to this length. So that is all about similar triangles. And if you have the pole of known length, you can obviously calculate AB because you know the length of the shadows as well. So this is a simple way of measuring the height of a tree based on the shadow method. And there are different methods that we discussed earlier. You can go back to the slides and look at what were the different methods of measuring the tree heights. Next, you come to forest survey. How do you carry out a survey of the entire forest? And there are different surveys based on different things. And the types of surveys based on area is a plain survey, where a very small area, if you measure or if you survey, then that can be considered to be a flat land. So if you might already be aware, Earth is not flat. Earth is not a flat area. And if you want to measure like a huge area, you will have to consider the curvature of the Earth's surface, right? But if you're talking about a very small area, at that scale, you can actually consider it to be flat or plain, and then that would be called a plain survey. And this small area is usually considered to be less than 250 kilometers square. But if you are carrying out, if you're accounting for the shape of or the curvature of the Earth, you have that's called a geodetic survey. In a geodetic survey, you take into account what was the shape of the Earth, right? And based on the instruments that you're using to do these surveys, there are different types. There's a chain and tape survey, in which you are making linear measurements using a chain and a tape. So basically, you have a tape measure, and then you are like measuring the land like this. So you're measuring how much. Say you have two trees, you want to know how far they are, or there's a river flowing somewhere here. You want to know how far these trees are from the river. So you can use a chain and tape, like you carry out a tape measure and then you see how far they are. So that's basically it. So it's a linear measurement, simple as that. Then there is another one which is called a compass survey, in which apart from taking linear measurements, you also make angular measurements using a compass. So for measuring angles, there's a reference point, which is usually the magnetic north. So if you again you have that same river flowing through the land, and then you have trees here. So you want to know that, okay, fine, so this would be the magnetic north, like in this area. So you want to know the linear distance of the tree from the river, right? But you also want to know, so you have the linear distance of both of these trees. But if you want to carry measure what is the angle at which these different trees are located from each other, or what is the angle that they form with the river, and things like that, you will have to like use the compass to find out at which angle different trees are present, right? So this is the linear distance, distance between these twos. But what is the angle that this tree subtends to this tree? Things like that. Or you want to like, so you want to basically map what is present on the ground to your map on the paper. So to map it exactly like that, you need to know how different things are located on land versus on paper. And to get that, you'll have to measure the angles as well. You can't just do with the linear measurements, right? So that's a compass survey. Then there's a plane table survey. Basically, as I said again, you take measurements on field and then you convert it to drawings on paper. So that's a plane table survey. You take two reference points and then you take angles of points from these reference points to basically get so to basically get where different things are located on land. And similarly, you can put them to scale on paper. So to make a plane table survey, you'll need to take compass measurements as well, right? And you'll need to take chain tape measurements as well. So to get to the plane table survey, you'll need to do above both the methods. So yeah, in plane table survey, you basically get measurements on field and then you convert it to a map on paper. And then there's a theodolite survey. Basically, you use instruments that measure both horizontal as well as vertical angles. So it does not give you like a 2D drawing like this. It also gives you a height of the tree. So now you have a 3D measurement as well. So you're not just measuring horizontal angle between this tree and that tree, but you're also measuring a vertical angle that this tree ka crown subtends on the ground. So that's basically a theodolite survey where you're measuring both distances between things and the heights of different objects, right? So these are different kinds of surveys based on the instruments that you're using to measure the things. So that's all about forest mensuration. So you carry out survey and first you measure things. You measure the Diameter of the tree, you measure the height of the tree, more or less these two things are measured. And in surveys, you survey an area. If it's a small area, it's called a plane survey. If it's a big area, it's a geodetic survey. And then based on instruments, it could be a chain tape survey. You're just taking 2D measurements of how far one thing is from another. Compass survey, you also see how far the things are, but also at what direction the thing is from the at what direction different objects are located. Then there's a plane table survey. You try to convert what you see on land to on paper, so forming a map. And then a theodolite survey, in which you don't just look at horizontal angles, not just a 2D survey, but also a 3D. You also look at the vertical angles, right? Then you come to threats to forests. We discussed what are the different threats that forests face. Forests can face threats based either because of natural causes or because of man made causes. Natural causes include different things like you can see here. There is frost damage that can be caused to the plants. There is wind throw. Here in this image, you can see the wind was so high that the tree is damaged, it's broken. There is insect or pest infestation. So, different insects can affect different plants and lead to their death. Then there is different diseases that can spread in the plants in the forest, or which can eventually destroy the vegetation in that area. There can be damage caused by animals. For example, there's a lot of grazing happening in that forest, so it will not allow a lot of plants to establish themselves. The crop will not be able to grow to a proper height, and this is again a damage caused by animals. And there's invasive species. For example, you can see here Lantana camara, so which is an invasive species. If an invasive species is introduced into an area, this can come actually under both natural as well as man-made. If that invasive species was introduced by because of people as a man-made, um, because of anthropogenic factors, like somebody actually brought it from somewhere and put it here, that's an invasive, that would be a man-made cause threat to the forest. But if it came on its own, either because of wind or because of water, if from one area certain seeds got transferred to another area and they've established there now, then that will be like a natural cause. And invasive species are basically species that do not belong to this area, they're not native to this area, but now that they have been introduced, they are able to utilize the resources much more better than the natural local species, and so they outcompete the local species and they spread there in huge numbers. So that's why invasive species can be damaging, because the local species are not able to compete them. And then because of climate change, different things can happen. Because of climate change, temperatures are high and species are not able to maintain themselves in such high temperatures. Or because of climate change, the monsoon is delayed, or the monsoon is occurring earlier than expected. All of this affects the phylogeny, not phylogeny. All of this affects actually the fruiting time and all of these things about the forest. So if the trees are not fruiting on time, then that can affect how different plants or animals are affected by that. For example, say there's a bird species which times egg laying, which times the its egg laying and the clutch size based on the uh, time when fruiting happens. For example, it's a frugivorous species. These are birds that feed on berries or trees, and so they time their egg laying with the time when the trees majorly fruit. But because of climate change, say the temperatures are high and the trees have actually started fruiting earlier than they used to, because the temperatures are high and these the metabolism is happening faster, so the trees are fruiting now earlier than expected because the seasons have shifted slightly. But the so eventually the trees have fruited, but now the bird has not laid its eggs till now, because it is following its own cycle, which it had. Because it takes time, it takes generations for the animals to time themselves according to the climate, according to the plants around them. So now the birds are laying their eggs later. So when the eggs are laid, when the chicks hatch out, now when the chicks hatch out, that time is not the same as the time at which the plants were fruiting. So the birds will not have enough resources to feed their chicks. So that is a problem which happens because of climate change, because things fall out of time, right? So yeah, these are some natural threats to forests. Then there is forest fires. Of course, there's forest fires, which is again a natural threat, can be natural as well as so all these, the three factors here, the invasive species, climate change, and forest fires, they fall under both natural as well as man-made causes, right? Threats based on man-made because of people are is includes illegal felling of trees. If you are over harvesting forests, then there is no trees left, and it takes time for the young plants to establish themselves, which will basically lead to destruction of forest in that area. Illegal mining, people are like clearing land in order to mine soil or to mine minerals out of that area. So, illegal mining, illegal grazing, again, if there's a lot more grazing happening in that area, that will also harm the forest. Encroachment, people are destroying more and more forest in order to encroach the land and to establish their industries or plants and things like that. Then, other threats include degradation, pollution, poaching, illegal hunting of animals, and then, as I said, invasive species, climate change, and forest fires. These fall under both man made and natural causes. So, these are some threats to forests. Then we discussed forest fires in a little bit of detail. We discussed it. There's this fire triangle here. So, for a forest fire to maintain itself, or like for a forest fire to happen, you need all these three things. There has to be there has to be fuel which can be burnt. There has to be sufficient amount of oxygen, and heat will be emitted out of this fire, right? And so to cut down a forest fire, you can basically take out one of these factors, and the forest fire can be controlled, or any fire for that matter. And forest fire basically is defined as an uncontrolled fire in an area of combustible vegetation in forests. So, if an area includes trees which can actually catch on fire, so then an uncontrolled spread of fire in that area is called a forest fire. Different causes include natural and man made causes. Some natural causes are like lightning. If there's a lot of lightning happening in that area, some trees can catch on fire. Volcanic eruptions in that area lead to forest fires. Rubbing of dry bamboo together leads to forest fires. Friction of rolling stones, if there are multiple stones rolling against each other and there's friction between them, that can lead to a forest fire. Again, it would be a natural cause because nobody, like a human, is not sitting there and rubbing those stones, right? So that's a natural causes. And then there are man-made causes as well to forest fires, which you would already be aware of. People, either somebody is working in a forest or somebody is there in a grassland, and so mostly man-made causes are what do you call it, they're not intentional, they're mostly unintentional. Maybe somebody went out for tourism and they lit a campfire and that went out of hand, and the campfire put the forest on fire. Somebody threw a lit cigarette into a grassland which had a lot of dry grass, and then they don't realize it then, but eventually that spread as a forest fire. Or if there was some work happening, some road construction happening, and then they were, using fire to melt down tar, or these different things, or there's charcoal making happening. These things require some amount of fire, but if that fire goes uncontrolled, spreads to the forest, it can lead to a forest fire, right? And then there are different forest fire can be classified into three different types. There is ground fire, which mostly happens even underground. You cannot see it on the surface of the ground. So so it's mostly goes unnoticed unless it becomes a surface fire. So the ground fire happens just below the ground, and mostly you can notice it because the ground starts getting warmer. But eventually, it usually goes unnoticed. And there's surface fire where forest fire, where the fire is happening at the grass level or the shrub level, and then there is crown fire where the fire is spreading uh, throughout the tree canopies. So it's spreading through the tree canopies. So that's called crown fire. Mostly surface fire becomes a crown fire as the climbers, there's a lot of climbers present in the forests, right? So if one of these climbers catches on fire, the fire can spread from the surface level to the ground level. So these are three different types of forest fires: ground, surface, and crown fire. Different management strategies are used to control forest fires. There's prevention, there is monitoring and reporting, there is firefighting, and there's rehabilitation of forests, and then there is community mobilization. Prevention, where you try to prevent anything that can cause a forest fire. So either you'll be building fire lines. So fire line is basically an area from which you completely take out all fuel. So if there is an area which you completely devoid of leaf litter, then you can be sure that on both sides of this area. So for example, this is a forest which has a lot of so, for example, imagine this to be leaf debris. So, this is dry leaves present on the forest, right? Now, if you clear this particular area of any kind of dry leaf debris, then this is called a forest line. So what you do is you collect all of this dry leaves from both these sides and you accumulate them here. So one second. So basically you have a lot of leaves here. They are dry leaves, they can catch on fire. What you do is you pile these leaves on this straight path and then you burn them. So once you've burned them, so this area is completely devoid of any leaves now. So this area, all the fuel has been used up by the combustion that you carried out. So that fire that you put is actually supposed to be controlled. So the forest department takes care that this fire does not go out of hand, which they are putting. So if you have a lot of leaf litter in a particular area, you collect that and make that into a thin path. On that path, you put fire. And now that you have burnt all the leaf litter, there is no combustible matter present on the forest ground. So if eventually there is a fire in this area on this side, this fire will not be able to spread on that side because the center area does not have any leaf litter present, right? So that's like one of the ways of preventing a forest fire. Then there is monitoring. So you constantly keep on monitoring the area. You have forest guards, which usually go around the forest and constantly monitor if there's a fire happening. Or you can use like satellite surveys as well. So there are satellites that are going around the planet, right? So you can look at the satellite images and see if there is any forest fire happening, and you can always keep a lookout for that. You have forest like firefighting on hold, like if there are areas which are prone to getting to catching forest fires, you keep these firefighting units close to them so that if there's a forest fire they can like hurry up and try to prevent that fire from spreading. Then eventually if a forest has actually been destroyed by the forest fire, you try to rehabilitate that forest, you try to plant trees, and you try and prevent so you try to rehabilitate that area, you try to um, uh, like rebuild that forest in that area. And community mobilization is when forest department takes the help of the local community and mobilizes the local community, spreads awareness to not like throw around lit cigarettes, or to not put up bonfires near the forest area, and also to tell them to help the people. So if the forest department alone cannot prevent forest fires because they happen on a large scale, so they also mobilize the local community to help them when a forest fire happens so that they can prevent the spread of the forest fire. Fire lines, okay, yeah, this is what I was talking about. Basically, fire lines are sufficiently broad, cleared strips of land, and they are kept free of all sorts of inflammable material so that the fire cannot spread from one area to another. So, this area you try and maintain in such a way that there is no combustible matter present on the ground in this area, so that even if there's a forest fire on one or the other side, it does not spread to the other side, right? So this is how it happens, even though there is leaf litter on the left side and on the right side, but this path you have cleared of leaf litter and you have put fire to the leaf litter in the center, so that now if fire happens on the left side, it does not spread to the right side because there is no longer any leaf litter present in the central path, right? So I hope this is clear. And forest management, what is forest management? Basically, management is an integration of silviculture and different business concepts so as to best achieve the landowner's objectives. So, whoever that land belongs to, they might have different objectives. And to best achieve those objectives, if you integrate silviculture and business concepts, that brings you to forest management. And what could be the different objectives of a person or a government owning land? Could be to have a large amount of timber and non-timber produce, could be to get a lot of economic returns out of that forest, or they could be to preserve the forest and increase the biodiversity in that area, could be to conserve soil. How does forest help in conserving soil? As you know, the trees bind the soil together. So if there's a lot of wind or a lot of water flowing in that area, the soil will not get eroded by the wind or water action because the trees are binding the soil together with their roots. So your motive could be to conserve soil, could be to retain water in that area, right? So these could be the different objectives that you have, and based on these, you practice different sort of management practices to best achieve the objectives that you have in mind. So what is silviculture? Silviculture basically comes from the Latin word silva and the French word culture. Basically, you're trying to, it's the art and science of growing and cultivating trees. Silva means wood. Cultivation, culture leads to cultivation. So eventually, when you put these two together, you get silviculture. So it's the art and science of growing wood. And silvicultural system includes these three different processes. One of them is harvesting. Basically, you're clearing the pre-existing forest crop. So if somebody is maintaining the forest for, so this harvesting mostly comes in handy if you're clearing the forest, because maybe you are maintaining the forest for getting out timber. So if you're maintaining the forest for getting timber returns, so you harvest the crop, then you read to renewal of the forest crop, which comes under regeneration. And then there is stand tending, basically when you're taking care of a standing crop. So you have a forest crop, and you also have to keep tending it time to time, in the sense basically you're either removing weeds, you're adding fertilizer, or you are pruning the plants to allow them to grow to their maximum capacity. So there are these three different processes which come under silvicultural system. Harvesting, basically aggregation of all operations, including pre-harvest planning and post-harvest inspection, and they're related to felling of trees and extraction of resources. So all the processes, all the operations which are related to either felling of trees or extracting of resources come under harvesting. Then there is regeneration. As I said, you're basically trying to renew the tree cover and establish the young trees, which can either happen naturally or artificially. And then there is tending. For the benefit of the forest crop, you can tend to the forest vegetation at any stage, and it can happen either on focal vegetation or on competing vegetation. So if there's a tree that I'm trying to I want this tree to establish. Either I can tend this tree in the sense that I am pruning some branches, cutting here and there so that it like gets a bigger crown, or I could be tending the competing vegetation. For example, there's a climber here which is climbing onto the tree, so I'm cutting down this climber, or there's a lot of weeds here growing, so I'm cutting down all of those weeds. So this tending could be directed towards the focal vegetation or could be directed towards the competing vegetation. So this is all about silvicultural systems. Then there is rotation age. So can you guys tell me what is rotation age? We have discussed this multiple times in this in the lectures where we talk about harvesting trees and taking out timber. So what is rotation age? Anybody? Come on, take a guess. You guys would know what is rotation age. No? Okay. Uh, Rotation is basically the number of years between the formation and the final felling of the crop. So rotation age is the planned number of years. For example, you are maintaining a forest and you want to fell the forest at 80 years of age, 50 years of age. So that is when basically maybe your trees achieve maturity, and that is when you want to fell the trees for the timber. So the planned number of years between the formation of the forest and the final felling of the forest crop, or it could be the average age at which a tree is mature enough for felling. So that's the rotation age, right? And then silvicultural system, as we have discussed, it basically there are different types of silvicultural systems. So if there's this flow chart to describe what is going on. So here you can see is the felling or the regeneration of trees, how is it happening? Is it concentrated on one particular part of the forest, or is it continuously happening over the entire forest? If it's being carried out over the entire forest, then that's called a selection system. If it's happening on a concentrated forest area, then you ask two more questions: is the old crop being cleared in a single felling, or is it being cleared in successive regeneration fellings? So like you cut down one part, then you go to the next part, then you go to the next part. if it's happening like that, or is it happening in a single felling. If it's happening in a single felling, that's a clear cutting system. If it's happening in successive regeneration fellings, that's a shelter wood system. Again, in shelter wood system, there are three different types. How is the canopy being opened, in the sense that how are you cutting down the trees? Is it happening evenly over compartments? Then that's called a uniform system. Is it happening in scattered gaps? That's called a group system. Or is it happening irregularly and gradually? Um, then that's called a irregular shelter wood system. So these are different silvicultural systems which we discussed in the logging and the yield lecture. We were talking about cutting down trees and how do you regenerate forests. Clear felling system basically has these following characteristics. It's concentrated on one particular part of the forest, and the clearing is done in one single felling. And the harvesting system, in which all the merchantable trees within a specified physical area of land are felled and no significant tree cover remains. So you go to an area, all of the trees are more or less now mature enough for you to for you to fell them and sell the timber. So you go cut down all of the trees, and now there is no significant tree cover left in this area. So that's called clear felling system. And you can assume that mostly this would be useful in an area which has a uniformly aged forest. And eventually, after you have clear felled the forest, eventually when you will regenerate or when you will renew the forest, it will again be a uniformly aged, uniformly structured forest, because you are planting all of the trees at the same time, so they'll have the same age, right? So that's clear felling system. Then what is regeneration? As we discussed, act of renewing tree cover is regeneration. There are three ways: natural regeneration, assisted natural regeneration, artificial regeneration. Natural regeneration, so if you have done clear felling and now that area has no trees left, if you leave it on its own and you do nothing to that area, then natural regeneration, that is what is natural regeneration. You do not do anything to the area, you just leave it barren. But natural regeneration is not that useful in the case of clear felling, because in clear felling you have entirely destroyed that particular patch of land. There is no trees left. So now, because there is no trees left, there is no source of seeds. If there's no trees, there is no trees to give you seeds, and so naturally plants cannot grow on their own, at least not fast enough, right? So natural regeneration usually comes in handy in the shelter wood systems, or in areas where you have left behind some fruiting trees which can provide you seeds for the rest of the land. Assisted natural regeneration is where you more or less leave the area alone, but maybe you try and if plants are coming up, maybe you try and help them by adding some manure or by watering that area, or you know you spread seeds or something like that. And then there's artificial regeneration, in which it's entirely artificial. We either you either go and what do you call it, disperse seeds in that area, and then properly take care of that area for so that it can grow into trees, or you bring up seeds in a nursery and make them into saplings, and once they have become big enough, that is when you go and plant these saplings into the forest area. So that is what is artificial regeneration. It's entirely artificial. In assisted natural regeneration, you let the trees come up on their own, but you can assist them by providing water or manure, or like tending to the crop, and taking out weeds which compete to the area and things like that. So that's regeneration, and three different ways of regeneration. Then there is selection system, which we said, if you're not clear felling and if it's happening throughout the forest, then that's called selection system. Here what here happens is, and how you harvest trees is that, for example, there's this graph, you see there is dbh, which is diameter at breast height, and then there's number of trees. What you'll see is there is high amount of trees which are young, but eventually mature trees, when you go to mature trees which have a higher dbh, they'll be eventually lower in number. And then you select one particular dbh, that okay, fine, if my tree is has this much diameter, that is when I will cut this tree, because that is when maybe it is the highest economical benefit you will get out of that tree. So you will cut that tree at that selected dbh. So you select a particular dbh over which, if you find any tree over that dbh, you will cut it down. So it's a little bit labor intensive, in the sense that people have to go and measure all the tree diameters, and then select the trees which have a diameter over that like above that particular selection criteria which you have chosen. So that's why it's called selection system, because you're selecting trees to cut down. So felling and regeneration are happening continuously over the whole area of the forest, and they're mostly happening almost every year. So every year you go to the forest, you survey the forest, you choose the trees which you're going to cut down, you cut them down, and then you go next year again, and then some of the trees would have grown to your selection dbh, and then you go and cut them down again. Eventually when you're doing this, the younger generation will also keep growing, because now that you have felled a tree, another tree will come and take its place, right? So that is how it keeps happening over and over again. Felling and regeneration are done without interruption over a very very long period of time. So you keep on felling, and the regeneration will also keep on happening alongside. So there's no interruption happening, and it keeps on happening over a long period of time. It usually produces an uneven aged crop in every portion. So when you're working on a forest area in which you're doing selection system, you will get an uneven aged forest. Why is that? So you cut a tree which was above your selection dbh, and then you came back. Now next year you go and you got another trees, right? In their place new trees are growing now, because all of these have not been planted at the exact same time. You will not have an even aged forest. So when you the tree growing in the place where you cut the trees earlier will be older compared to the trees which are coming up now, in the place of trees that you're destroying recently. So to give you a slight example, um, for example, you have trees here, right? And they are differently aged. So imagine they are different aged trees. Now you went to the forest, and then you cut down some trees. So you cut down this tree, maybe it is of a proper height. You cut down this tree, you cut down this tree. So this you did in the first year, right? And then you get new growth here. So one second. So you get new trees in this area which you cut down. Now, some other trees achieved maturity, right? So then you went and cut those down. Next year, you came here again. These green ones have grown a little bit, and these ones you cut down because they are mature enough for you to now sell their timber. And now, in this year, the green ones have grown a little bit more, but eventually, new trees come here which are smaller. So this will lead to an uneven aged forest. So again, all of these trees will not have the same age, because you're not destroying them at the same time and not planting trees at the same time. So you'll end up with an uneven aged crop. I hope that was clear. And then here, regularity is important in order to maintain all age classes in correct proportions. So you need to regularly keep on carrying out this harvesting of trees and regeneration, because you want to maintain all types of age classes in correct proportions. If you eventually have a lot more young trees than older trees, then next year you will not be able to go and harvest any timber, because all of the trees are young and none of them is attaining maturity, right? So you need to maintain all age classes in correct proportions. And the rotation age here, you're not cutting is displaced by dbh. In clear felling, you were cutting all the trees down which have achieved 50 years of maturity, right? So the rotation age here is being displaced by the dbh. And there is no interruption to the main canopy, because you're not destroying the entire area at the same time. So the canopy still remains more or less intact. Then the last one was shelter wood system. It's basically a method of securing natural tree reproduction under the shelter of old trees, which are removed by successive cuttings to allow the regenerating seedlings to receive gradually increasing amount of light. So in Shelterwood, what we did was we still selecting one portion of the forest, but you're not cutting down all the trees. You're leaving behind some trees so that they are able to provide shelter to the younger generation that is coming up. Because sometimes not all plants are able to grow in extreme sunlight, and they're not all of them are not light demanders. Some of them like shade, so it's better to leave behind some older trees which can provide shade and prevent a lot of wind action to these younger seedlings. So that is what is called shelter wood. The wood is providing shelter to the younger generation seedlings. So it's a natural regeneration silviculture system in which natural regeneration can happen because there are trees present which can provide seeds and shelter to the younger generation. Mature trees are removed in stages and not all at once, and the remaining trees provide shelter and seeds. New forest develops under the protection of old trees. There are different variation in the shelter wood system. One of them is uniform, where uniformly one particular compartment of the land is cleared. One of them is group, where, for example, here you can see certain random group of forest is cleared and the others are left behind. Then there is strip. In strips the land is cleared, and then there is irregular and natural, and different combinations of these. So there are different variations of shelter wood system. Natural is where the tree is falling down on its own, and you can use different combinations of these as well. What are the different steps you should follow while logging, or what are the different steps that are followed? First of all is cruising, where a survey or recce is carried out, and the foresters, they conduct a survey and then they locate and estimate the volume and what is the quality of the standing timber. Then after cruising, they make a map, which they have the information of where the trees are located that need to be felled. The next step is basically you go and mark these trees on land. After you've marked the trees on map, then you go and mark the trees on, like, you mark the tree in paint, which are supposed to be felled, because it's not the foresters which will go and fell. It might be given out to a contractor, and the contractor will not have the information of what trees are to be felled, so you basically mark them in paint. Yellow or orange color means that the tree is to be cut. Blue means this tree is to be retained. Red means it's a boundary tree, it's at the edge. And white means that it's that these are research plots. And black is a correction marking, which means that okay, they by mistake marked that tree to be cut, but it's supposed to be retained. So here you can see how the trees are painted in different colors, which means different things. Then the next thing is actually the felling, where you're cutting the tree. You can either be using axe, saw, chainsaw, or any other device. And you have to supposed to maintain some sort of safety on the forest floor. You should not walk on a timber stack, because then the timbers can roll and you can fall down. For every machine, you need to maintain some amount of minimum distance from the machine. You should use safety devices, maintain distance from trees, and you have to plan beforehand whenever you're going to fell a tree, right? And here we also discussed escape routes. If this is a tree and it's going to fall down in this direction, then these are the escape routes at which you should be standing, and you can run away if the tree basically falls down in some other direction. These are the safest routes. Basically they make an angle of 45 degrees from this axis. So this angle is 45 degrees. So these are escape routes. You can read more about these in the previous slides, because we've discussed this plenty beforehand, right? So there's some amount of safety you need to maintain in the forest while carrying out felling of trees. What is the process after the tree has been felled? So after the tree has been felled, you carry out delimbing, where you remove all the branches on the tree and you leave them there in the forest itself. There's bucking, where you cut the timber into smaller logs so that they can be carried out of the forest. And you use some unique hammer marks on these logs, which indicate whether these trees have been cut legally or not. So if there is no hammer marks, that would indicate that this tree was not legally cut down. Then there is skidding. Basically, you move the log um, to the landing area. Landing area is basically the area which is close to the road from where the trucks can be loaded. But to till the landing area, the logs are moved by skidding, either using elephants, tractors, or manually by people. Then there's something called a growing stock. Growing stock is basically volume of all the living trees, which is more than X centimeter in diameter at breast height. This X centimeter DBH would actually be the selection criteria, right? So, volume of all the living trees which have a diameter more than X centimeter, and they're measured. This diameter is mostly measured over bark or stump height, typically, basically 1 foot, to a top stem diameter of Y centimeter. So, here is a tree. So, you measure somewhere here the dbh here, and if this dbh is over x centimeter, and if this one is over y centimeter, then you can count this tree into the growing stock, right? And you can either choose to include or exclude the branches which have a minimum diameter of z centimeter. So basically I will include the branch if it has a diameter more than z centimeter, but if it's below z, I will exclude all of those branches. So like that, you either include or exclude the trees from your growing stock. So volume of all the living trees which have x centimeter diameter at breast height, y centimeter diameter at the top stem height, and then you include or exclude the branches. In India, this X and Y centimeter is considered as 10 centimeters, and Z is mostly taken to be 5 centimeters. Then what is commercial growing stock? Basically, the part of the growing stock which actually has some potential commercial value, which can be sold under the current market conditions, either internationally or domestically. That comes under the commercial growing stock. And mostly you have a certain minimum DVH over which your tree should be, and that is when it becomes a part of the commercial growing stock. If you're managing a forest for timber extraction alone, you should ensure that the growing stock is high and the increment, that is the change in the growing stock, is always positive. That year after year, the growing stock is increasing in your forest that you're maintaining. Okay. And delta GS is basically measured as growing stock in the year T plus 1 minus the growing stock in the previous year divided by 1. Because divide by the period over which you're counting. So in this, T plus 1 minus T will be 1. So that's why you're dividing by 1. Increment basically is the increase either in diameter, basal area, height, volume, quality, or value of an individual tree or the entire forest crop during a given amount of time. It has the following variables: in growth or recruitment, which is the volume of trees that were not included in the previous measurement, but they now match the required DBH values. So now they can be included. So that's in growth. Basically, these trees were not included in the growing stock in the previous year, but now they can be included because they've achieved the required diameter. Harvest, basically volume of trees that are harvested during measurement period. And mortality, basically harvested means they've been cut down, and mortality, the number of trees that died during the measurement period. So this is all this comes under increment, and these are the different variables. Then talking about site quality, there is some relative productive capacity of a particular site is called the site quality. Relatively how productive this site is compared to other sites, that gives you the site quality. It can be calculated using the formula: site productivity is site quality plus management input. So what is the original so site quality along with the management input forms the site productivity. So एक site का कुछ quality है, then we provide some management input to that site to improve the quality, and that will give you the productivity, how productive this site is. Management inputs can include things like adding fertilizers, treating the site, irrigation, weeding, grazing, soil compaction, growth stock manipulation, all of these things. And field estimation can include crop height method, sample plot method. So basically, in a site quality, if the crop height is high, means that that area has a high site quality. Or you can use a sample plot method in which you have one particular sample plot. In there, you take different measurements of how good the trees are, how good the crop is. That will give you the site quality. Measurement of site quality, there is one, this CVPI index, which is called the Climate Vegetation Productivity Index, given by Patterson. It's a climate based model which is used to estimate the potential net primary production or the maximum sustainable timber volume of a forest site. So this model estimates ki what is the net primary production of this area, or what is the maximum sustainable timber volume, कितना टिम्बर वॉल्यूम ये एरिया सस्टेनेबली प्रोड्यूस कर सकता है. दैट गिव्स यू दी CVPY index. Index is calculated using 5 climatic factors. So CVPY is basically TV divided by TA multiplied by P into G by 12 into E by 100. Here the different factors are: TV is the temperature, the mean maximum temperature of the warmest month. So if the warmest month, for example, in India is June, so what was the mean maximum temperature during that month? Then TA is the temperature range, difference between the mean maximum and the mean minimum temperature. So what is the maximum and the minimum temperature? Uska range. P is the precipitation. G is the growing season, number of months with a favorable temperature during which growth of the tree can happen. And E is the light factor. Percentage of solar radiation which is received at the pole compared to the radiation received at the latitude at which we are discussing the site. So that basically gives you the site quality, how good the site is for growth of trees. Forest growth mostly happens when the site quality or CVPY index is more than 25. Right? So this is one way of measuring site quality. There are other methods, again, which we had discussed earlier. You can go back to the slides and check that out. Then there's something called the yield, which you might already be aware of. It's basically the amount of timber which you can harvest. Either you can talk about harvesting it at one particular time or harvesting it per period of time, like every year how much timber I can extract, or this year how much timber can I extract. Sustainable yield is basically the volume of timber that can be harvested every year till perpetuity. So I have a forest land, I have certain number of trees. Every year, how many trees, how much timber can I extract from this forest till infinity? Like every year, even if I extract 10 trees, I can keep on doing that without destroying that area, without harming the forest in that area. Yield can either be a flow of forest products harvested or a volume or amount of products present or harvestable in a given forest stand over a period of time. So what is the flow of forest products? Basically, every year कितना forest product तुम निकाल सकते हो, which can either be trees or can be non-timber forest produce. So how much can you harvest? Either again, either over a period of time or over a in one particular year. Expressed usually as a rate or quantity per unit time. Again, as I said, ki every year how much can you do it? Non-timber forest produce, basically what we have discussed so many times, anything which is any forest produce which is not timber is non-timber forest produce. And if you look at the definition given by UNCED, it's basically all utility products, all usufructs, which usufructs means that you can legally use those things. So all usufructs or utility products of plants, animals, and minerals except timber obtained from the forest or the afforested area. तो उस फॉरेस्ट में से तुम कितना प्लांट मटेरियल ले सकते हो, कितना एनिमल मटेरियल ले सकते हो, कितना मिनरल मटेरियल ले सकते हो, minus the timber. So we're not talking about timber here. So that's all is non-timber forest produce. Other terms used are, some of them are given here: non-timber forest produce, non-wood forest benefits, other economic forest products, or forest biological resources, all of that. And you have different ways of classifying NTFPs. You can either classify them based on the product that you're using, based on what you're using it for, or based on what you extracted. So different products are gums, resins. What you're using it for, you can either be using it for food, for construction, for other traditional purposes. And what are you extracting exactly? Are you taking out leaves? Are you taking out sap? Are you taking out fruits? Things like that. And by the level of use, are you using it for your household or are you using it for commercial selling? Then we discussed in the last lecture itself social forestry, which is done by the people, for the people, community is participating, and it is outside of traditional forests. Traditional forests are basically forests which cannot be like do not have any input. They are only maintained by the forest department alone. And this social forestry is forestry done with the aim of producing protection and recreation benefits for the communities. Different types of social forestry: it can be farm forestry, agroforestry, or community forestry, or extension forestry. We discussed this. And then there is conventional forestry, which usually has long rotation periods. It's conducted by the department and it is based on single use, basically like clear felling. And then social forestry, it has short rotation periods done in collaboration with the local community. And you don't talk about only single use. You don't just extract timber from that forest altogether, but you every year go and take out multiple things like non-timber forest produce. So you can use it over and over again because the people living in the community nearby would require these forest products in order to sustain themselves, right? So that is social forestry. So that was all from this course. If so, this was a quick summary of the entire course and the major concepts. You can go to the previous slides or that I have uploaded or that have been uploaded by the course itself to understand what all was discussed in greater detail. Now we have a short quiz. So should I start the quiz? Do you guys have any doubts? Do you guys want to ask anything?
Just you can start.
Okay. Yeah. So there are some questions. You can either type it out in the chat box or you can unmute and tell me. First question: what is the main advantage of the COPPIS system? So we had discussed earlier what was the COPPIS system. So, what is the main advantage of the COPPIS system? It produces very large, high quality timber, relies on the ability of trees to regenerate from stump or stool, best system for high altitude mountains, or prevents all types of forest fires.
A.
It's not A. Others, you guys have attended classes where I talked
B.
about purpose. Yeah, it's B.
B.
Basically, it relies on the ability of trees to regenerate from the stump or stool. So, what is coppice is basically vegetative regeneration. So, if you've cut down trees and you're just left with the stump of the tree, and like this. So, when plants start growing out of this, like when trees or yeah, younger trees start growing out of this, that's called coppices, and eventually you can rely on this for the tree to regenerate, for the forest to regenerate. So that's called coppice system. Next, the sustained yield principle implies cutting as many trees as possible to maximize profit today, removing only the increment growth so that the forest capital remains intact, never cutting any trees or converting all forest into agricultural land. So what is sustained yield principle implies?
B.
Yeah, basically, you just keep on removing the increment so that you still have the forest capital intact. So that if you can get out, say, if you can extract 100 trees from a forest area, and by the time you go to extract again, the forest would have, so say a forest has 1,000 trees, and every year it can you can extract 100 trees out of this, it becomes 900. Next year it will be 1,000 again. So every year, if you keep on extracting these 100 trees, you can still maintain the capital intact. It will always have the 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 major amount of trees there, which can actually regenerate to make the forest intact again. Anyway, what does a hypsometer measure? So this was something we discussed in the mensuration class. What does a hypsometer measure? Tree diameter, soil moisture, tree height, or light intensity? Yes, very good. Hypsometer is used to basically measure the tree height. This usually functions based on the angle measurement principle. Basically, a hypsometer gives you the angle which the crown of the tree is subtending from the point at which you're standing, and then you can measure. So, if this is a tree and you're standing here with a hypsometer, you can measure this distance, and the hypsometer will give you this angle here. So, based on this, you can calculate the height of the tree. Right? Next question. Which species is synonymous with montane subtropical pine forests in India? So, which tree species is found in this montane subtropical pine forest? Very easy question. The answer is right in front of you. Is it teak, chirpine, coconut, or mangrove? What is found in the subtropical pine forest?
B.
Yeah. Since we're already saying in the question itself that it's a pine forest, so the answer is B, which is chirpine. What is joint forest management? Is it management of a forest by two different state governments, partnership between forest department and local community, mixture of agriculture and animal husbandry, or managing two different species in the same plot? What is joint forest management?
B.
Yeah, very good. It's B, partnership between forest department and local communities. What is the rotation period in forest management? Time it takes for a tree to change its leaves, planned number of years between formation and regeneration, um, and its final felling, time taken for a forester to survey a compartment, seasonal migration of wildlife. So, what is rotation period?
A.
No, it's not A. We just discussed it in this lecture.
B.
Yeah. Basically, it's the planned number of years between when the crop is regenerated versus when it's supposed to be finally felled. So basically, when a tree is mature enough to be felled to for you to get some economical value out of it. A species that requires full sunlight to regenerate and grow is classified as shade bearer, light demander, halophyte, xerophyte.
Light demand.
Light.
Yeah, so it's as the term suggests, it's basically a light demander. In the context of forest protection, a crown fire is characterized by burning of organic matter below the soil surface, burning of the forest floor litter and grasses, Fire spreading through the tops of trees and shrubs. Fire used intentionally for forest health.
C.
Yeah, it's basically fire spreading through the tops of trees and bushes or shrubs. Which of the following is a non timber forest product? Teak logs, railway sleepers, tendu leaves, or plywood?
C.
Very good. It's C, tendu leaves. NDVI, Normalized Difference Vegetation Index, is calculated using which two bands of electromagnetic spectrum? Blue and green, red and near infrared, X rays and gamma rays, or thermal infrared and ultraviolet. So, do you guys remember from the previous lectures we discussed NDVI? We didn't discuss it today, but we've discussed it in the previous lectures. Normalized Difference Vegetation Index.
Red and near infrared.
Yeah. So, you guys are correct. It's red and near infrared radiation. Which silvicultural system results in an uneven aged forest? Clear felling, uniform shelterwood, selection system, or coppice with standard system?
Selection system.
Yes, it's basically selection system. We discussed it today. In forest mensuration, what does form factor represent? So, what is form factor? The ratio of tree height to its age, ratio of the actual tree volume to the volume of a geometric cylinder, composition of wood, chemical composition of wood, or the rate of leaf litter decomposition. So, what is the form factor? Yeah, you're correct. It's basically the ratio of the actual tree volume to the volume of a geometric cylinder. Basically, tells you the form of the tree. That's why it's called form factor. Which term describes the height at which tree diameter is standardized globally? 1.5 meter, 1 meter, 1.37
C.
meter, 2 meter.
C.
Yeah. So basically, 1.37 meters is the uh, breast height used for diameter at breast height. What is the primary determinant of forest types in Champion and Saith classification? Is it soil pH and nutrient content, temperature and rainfall regimes, distance from human settlements, or wind speed and direction? You are correct. It is basically temperature and rainfall. Oops. Okay. A tree has a DBH of 35 centimeters. Find its basal area in square meters. So I did not want to show this formula already, but here you have the formula of how to calculate basal area from the tree diameter. So a tree has diameter of 35 centimeters. Can you calculate its basal area in square meters? One answer has come. Other people are calculating.
Yeah, B.
Yeah, very good. It's basically 0.096. If you use this formula, you'll reach the answer. It's, yeah. Self-flowing character is seen in which of these soil types? Black cotton soil, alluvial soil, saline soil, or red and yellow soil? Which of these soils has a self-flowing character?
C.
It's not C. Yes, it's A. It's basically black cotton soil. So soil which is rich in clay is has a self-flowing character because clay absorbs water and swells up nicely, and then when the water is gone, it becomes very dry and develops cracks. So it has a slightly self-flowing character. Vertical arrangement of soil horizons is called texture, structure, profile, or science. What is the vertical arrangement of soil horizons called?
C.
Yes, it's basically the soil profile. Very good. In a triangle, the angle between, again, I gave you the answer. Anyway, in a triangle, the angle between the base and the hypotenuse is 60 degrees, and the hypotenuse is 4 centimeters. Find the length of the base. So here in this diagram, you can see what is which trigonometric thing to use, sine, cos, or tan, and then you can tell me what is the answer. So the angle between the base and the hypotenuse is 60 degrees, and the hypotenuse is 4 centimeters. What is the length of the base?
Two, these.
Yes. Basic maths question. You basically apply cos theta. Cos of 60 is half, so 4 ka half is 2. It's 2. Allowing some places and some creatures to exist without significant human interference is a definition of conservation, preservation, environmentalism, or all of these. We discussed this in last class itself. What was conservation and how it's different from preservation and environmentalism. So, what is which of these defines like allowing some places and creatures to exist without human interruption? Yes, you're correct. It's basically preservation. The working plan of a forest division is typically revised every 1 year, 10 year, 50 years, or 100 years.
D, 10 years.
Yes, it's basically 10 years. Every 10 years, the working plan is revised. Thank you so much, guys, for joining this lecture. This was the last class, last tutorial for this course. If you have any questions, you can ask me. You can go through the lecture videos on YouTube, or you can go through the slides on the Drive link that is shared with you guys. And yeah, if you have any questions, you can write me an email and I'll be happy to help.
Actually, there was a class tomorrow also.
Yeah,
We got the mail.
that'll be taken by another instructor. Like it's the last tutorial for me.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Okay, thank you for joining. If there's no further questions, I'll end the class. Yeah,
Thank you very much,
thank
for your
you.
help in support.
Yeah.